everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to see this many people here on a sunny evening, and people who care enough to be engaged and attentive to our democratic process. I'd like to give a special welcome to Ms. Kennedy's AP Government students from Burlington Edison High School here in the front row. We should all be really proud to have students here tonight. I know our Skagit County residents will show what it means to participate in a public meeting by sharing our feedback and questions, showing respect to the rest of our community members. I want to thank Representative Larson for hosting this event. There's a lot of uncertainty happening at the federal level. We hear about it and read about it every day. And there are programs and funding that I know that everyone in this room are concerned about, and would be happy to hear what Representative Larson has to say. I've known Congressman Larson for a long time, and I can attest that he has always made a point of being present in his district, ensuring his constituents and community partners have the opportunity to meet with him and provide feedback on his work. I'm proud to say we have quite a few projects in our community that have been successful as a result of his advocacy and funding support, in particular with his leadership on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and our Veterans Affairs Committee. Recently, Representative Larson has advocated for funds to support our concrete Sauk Valley Road stabilization project, our new electric ferry for Guaymas Island, and for the Maintenance, Operations, and Administrative Center for our Skagit Transit. He was also instrumental in opening the Mount Vernon Community-Based Outpatient Clinic, known as CBOC, which brought healthcare so much closer to our community's veterans. Thank you, Congressman Larson, for all the work you have done here during your long-standing career representing Skagit County, and we look forward to continuing our work during this session. Before I turn the microphone over to Representative Larson, I just want to remind everyone in the room that we all agree to a code of conduct in order to be here tonight. The code of conduct is posted around the room. Essentially, it is, we expect and hope that you remember that we are here in a public session, and really your good behavior is essential to make these kind of sessions productive and helpful to the public. There's a rule that we agreed to: no signs or banners, no unruly behavior. You are in a school, so I assume that folks know no smoking or vaping, and really give people the respect to say what they have to say. So there's no interference with the process of that event. And the staff will reserve the right to remove folks if those conditions aren't upheld. I look at our students. We need to show them what really democracy and process looks like. So with that, welcome again. We are really here. The star of our show is Congressman Rick Larson. Please welcome him.
Thanks everyone for coming. When I practiced this morning, the opening statement, it's about 11 minutes and 23 seconds or so, not including what I just told you. So just give me a chance to get through some of this. But I want to thank Lisa Janicki for being willing to come here and introduce me, and the folks at Burlington Edison High School as well for hosting. Thank you all very much. Thank you to everyone as well for taking the time to be here tonight as well. We did do an RSVP process because we've had a lot of members around the country do these town halls. Sometimes the numbers of people who show up is too much for the room, and the fire marshal gets involved. They didn't want to do that. So thank you for accommodating the RSVP process. As well, we are live streaming on Instagram Facebook and apparently on that person's phone as well. So to ensure this event is accessible to everyone. I'm asking everyone to submit your questions in advance from the RSVP. There's one question that everyone had in common. What are you doing to fight back against the Trump administration? And that's how it reads, too. When you read it, that's how it reads. So I'm going to start tonight by giving a report on the work I've done so far this year, and I'll turn to your questions. And all of you should have a pamphlet on your seat with the headline, January through April 2025 report. If not, you can share it with your seat neighbor, and we'll get it to you. It's also online on my social media account and on my website, larson.house.gov. So this report's a summary of what I've been doing this year, 2025, to fight for the families and people I represent in the district, as well as fight back against the excesses of the current administration. So I'm going to briefly go through this. Since Trump's inauguration, my office has received more than twice as many messages as compared to the same time last year. And just 52,400 last year, same period, 126,745. So more than twice the number. The office as well, we sent out 3 times as many as responses compared to the same time last year as well. So you are contacting me with your energy, and I appreciate that. And we are doing our dead level best to get back to you. I hope you can appreciate that as well. We're hearing your personal stories so that I'm able to understand specifically the damage that the administration is doing to the communities I represent.
Rick Larson, you are in violation of the genocide against international law. You are complicit in genocide. You are putting yourself up for possible future conviction in The Hague. There is no statute of limitations. You are complicit in genocide. Victory to Palestine. Palestine will be free. You are murdering Palestinians. You are in violation of international law. You are in violation of the genocide. You will be tried in The Hague.
So this is why I've had 106 meetings and events here in the district and throughout the state, and 76 meetings in D.C. and Washington State or with Northwest Washington groups. So we're meeting a lot of folks. Just remind you, if these obstructions continue, it only prevents other people from having that opportunity to get to Q&A. And that will be unfortunate if that's the case. So that's why I had telephone town halls in February and March, where more than 29,000 people have joined those town halls. So folks are participating like you are, as well as being online, as well as calling with their messages. So if you'd like to tell me how the administration has impacted your family, your business, or your life, you can go to the website as well on the back of this pamphlet, which is litigationandresponse.house.gov. That is, I wish it was called Doge Be Gone. It's easy to remember. Doge away. Get along, little doji.house.gov, it'll be better. It's litigationandresponse.house.gov. And there's a share your story on that, and that is the
Rick Larson, you're responsible for Palestine.
With genocide. I am very happy that Ethan Alexander, the last known American hostage, was released today. And I do call on this administration as well as the government of Israel to negotiate in good faith to release all remaining hostages as well as appropriate political prisoners while they continue to get towards a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and Israel. So But I will also note there's a lot of other questions that have come up in my office about things you're doing. An important service my office provides is helping folks communicate and navigate the federal agencies. This year, our staff has opened 256 cases so far. I'm going to summarize some of this once it's done. I take back the 11-minute time frame right now. So already, I've identified 3 ways that you all can be involved. First off, you can contact an office so you can tell me what you think. It matters what you tell me. Second, share your story. Share your story on litigation and response to House.gov. Third, the personal impact. If you're being personally impacted by a federal agency, you're not getting benefits here. The Veterans Affairs office is answering, Social Security office is answering. You can contact my office and we will open up a case and work for you on a personal basis. So there's already 3 ways that you yourselves can take some action as well. And if you need help, McKenna, the caseworker, is at the table outside to help you. So far this Congress, what we're doing to push back, I have co-sponsored 41 bills to protect voting rights, to protect the right to organize in a union, to keep Elon Musk away. I could probably just stop there to keep Elon Musk away. To keep Elon Musk away from your personal information, to end Trump's abuse of emergency and terror powers, to help military families access IVF and other fertility treatments, and to raise the minimum wage, just to name a few things. I want to be really clear, I was going to say this at the beginning, I am pro-Elmo and anti-Elon. Another way I'm pushing back against the Trump administration is my work as the top Democrat on the Transportation Committee, defending the hardworking air traffic controllers who are working every day to keep our skies safe and try to make sure we're not firing FAA safety critical employees. As noted in Lisa, I'm opposing local projects and protecting grants that are promised to our communities. An example was the work we did to ensure the Port of Anacortes is able to get money for a port redevelopment project that the administration turned off. We'll get that turned back on. Advocating for roadway safety, pedestrian safety, bike and ped infrastructure, as the law says it should be spent, by holding the Department of Transportation accountable to spend this money like Congress said it should. Last week, sure, I'm all for sidewalks and bike infrastructure. We're working on some rail investment in Everett and here in Burlington. So why all this transportation talk? You hear from me all the time. My responsibility as a top Democrat on the committee is to fight the Trump administration on aviation issues, roads and bridges, rail, public transit, and sometimes work with them when they're doing the things that Congress said they should do as well. But it also answers the question, if I'm not leading on this, who is? This is my job. But I get this question, why aren't you doing what Jamie Raskin is doing? Holding the Trump accountable in the courts. Why aren't you doing what Jasmine Crockett is doing to protect and speak for all federal employees who get fired? Why aren't you doing what Susan Delvenia is doing to protect Social Security in her role on the committee that oversees Social Security? These are all great questions, but you don't need 3 quarterbacks to one position. Right? My position as quarterback is in transportation. Jamie Raskin's job as head of the Judiciary Committee is to do the work he's doing. Jasmine Crockett on the Oversight Committee is in charge of doing that. And Susan's on the Ways and Means Committee, and they oversee Social Security. That's what they're doing. And when they have a question about transportation, they don't go to anybody else but me. And I got to have an answer for them, just like I have to have an answer for you. Everybody's playing their role. Everyone's playing their role in my party, in Congress, to be sure that we're doing our job to hold the administration accountable for its actions. But I'm also looking out for you here. I'm part of Washington State's, supporting Washington State's lawsuit to protect birthright citizenship. And Nick Brown is up for it. Closely tracking Mr. Juarez-Severino's case, immigration case, that he was arrested here in this county a few weeks back, and we were just briefed on this from his lawyers on his current status. That was last Friday. Staff got a briefing on that. We're working closely with Representative Jayapal, who is the House Democrats working on immigration, to demand that ICE and DHS respect the constitutional rights of everyone at the Constitution. And there are cards at the entrance about the legal rights that everyone in this country is entitled to, and I encourage you to take some home with you. They're in English and in Spanish. Hand them out to your friends, family, anyone that you might think doesn't need it. I voted against the Republican ripoff budget that cuts Social Security, Medicaid, education, and we're not done with that fight. Today, the Republicans came out and they only needed to find $880 billion in Medicaid cuts. Well, they found $912 billion in Medicaid cuts over 10 years. This is going to result in at least 13.7 million people in this country losing access to health care. And this is another battle that we're going to have in Congress. And of course, I support access to health care. And the reason I'm doing this is not to cut funding. It is not to cut spending. It is to pay for a $4.5 trillion tax cut for the richest Americans and wealthiest corporations. So that is what is going on. Showing up at town halls like this really does make a difference. Calling my office and sharing your story really does make a difference. The demonstrations that are taking place all over the district really does make a difference. The proof of that, though, is playing out right now as Republicans are struggling mightily to pass the Republican ripoff budget because people across the country have organized to protect things like Medicaid, like SNAP, like a variety of other things. My Republican colleagues are getting the message all the town halls and protests and phone calls. So please keep up that work. So tonight, with about 13 minutes or so, I've given my answer on Israel and Gaza, and now I'm going to move on to other questions. When you came in tonight and wanted to ask a question, you took a ticket and it had a number on it. And it didn't cost you anything. I didn't charge $1 for the raffle at all. So I have a bowl up here that has all the tickets that we received before we started. I'm going to choose 2 tickets at a time. I have 2 staff members here with microphones. Robin is here. Raise your hand, Robin. Keep it raised. See Robin here. And Sean Cannell. Sean is right back here walking from the middle row. And again, I have the tickets here. I'm going to do 2 at a time. As I announce your number, right? This number, right? Please make your way to the microphone. They will hold onto the microphone for you, so you don't have to. You're welcome. So if I call your ticket number, we want you to make your way to Sean or to Robin to ask your question. Now I'm going to call 2 numbers every 5 minutes. So we can move quickly through questions. Answer this on a long line. So when you hear your number, make your way to Sean or Robin. For the folks on the live stream, you can go to my website at larson.house.gov to send a message with your question. I do want to thank the security people here, as well as the police for keeping things civil as possible, given the circumstances. There are other very strong emotive issues, like cuts in healthcare, like cuts in SNAP and food assistance, like potential cuts to veterans services that deserve at least an equal voice in this room tonight. And so I'm hopeful that when we get to those questions, we can answer those. One reminder. The public dollars paid for this evening. So it's not a political event. You might have questions about how are you going to win next year? Or you might ask, how are you going to lose next year? I don't know. Or what are you going to do in 2028? And who are you going to support for president? And so on. Honestly, I have no idea. There's going to be 55,000 people running for president in 2028. But those are political questions. Those are questions about the politics. This is a public event. Public taxpayer resources paid for this. So this is not a strategy session about 2026 or 2028. So I just want to kind of give you a heads up on that. So I won't be answering those kinds of questions. But I imagine there'll be a lot of questions I will be answering tonight. We'll get started on that. So please take out your tickets for those who hold a ticket, and give people as much time as possible. I do see that they start with 5, 6, 2, 8. So I'll just say a little last four. 8165. 8165. Go to Sean right here, sir. 8165. And 8171. 8171. Can you make your way over here, all the way over, sir? And then I'm going to do the next two. Just stand in line in order. 8160. 8160. 8160. Going on. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. 8166. 8166. 8166. I'm going to do a few more. We'll get to it. I'm just standing up here all night to pick numbers. Yes, I hope. Yeah. I'm going to go here. 8471. 8471. 8471. You all decided you didn't want to have. 8469. 8469. Sorry. We've got to stick to the rules right now for a while. Thanks, though. 8146. 8146. Y'all get like these two guys are intimidating. I'm talking about the guys who don't have the microphones in their hands. All right, 8500. There you go, 8500 right here. Yay, a winner. 8498. 8498. Right back here. All right. Go ahead with the mustache. Yeah.
I took speech in high school.
You do that, and I'm going to, we're online, I'm going to paraphrase the question. So that means I'm not paraphrasing your comments or your long question. It's going to be a paraphrase. So I have to remember it.
So first, apologies. I'm bringing up the same subject that has already been voiced.
Don't apologize. Get your question.
In not a proper way. I've worked over 15 years overseas. I studied Arabic under Palestinian teachers who were refugees in Jordan. I worked in Muslim countries both before and after 9/11 with my 2 children and my wife. And I feel helpless as I watch the complete destruction of Gaza and now the West Bank. And I know people there personally. And it just seems like nothing is being done as Israel continues and verbally has said they want to finish the Palestinian homeland. And what can we do as a country? What can I support in my government to help these people?
Thank you very much. Apparently, any feedback from the floor is causing this problem, so I apologize for that. Thanks for your question. I noted what my response is so far.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, so thank you very much. In a paraphrase, the question is, what can be done about Gaza, about Palestinians, about humanitarian aid, about Israel now. Fair enough to say, yeah. And he also discussed some of his background in the region. Very helpful, thank you. So again, just to reiterate, very thankful that Mr. Alexander has been released. But we do need to resume efforts. We do need to resume efforts on the ceasefire, and the U.S. should lead on that. I'm not confident that this president wants to do that. We need to. I wish I knew. I'm not an AD expert, so sorry. We need to resume efforts to get humanitarian aid, and I signed a letter last week to the president with many members of Congress that asked for that. Those are immediate. I do think that there's a gap in my thinking, because beyond that, my focus is on continuing my support for a two-state solution where Israel lives, the country of Israel is secure, has secure borders, people who live there are secure, and there's a secure Palestinian state that Palestinians can live in, a Palestinian homeland. That we have to stay focused on that, regardless of who our president is, and regardless of who the head of the Israeli government is. I don't think that that's in the cards right now with the leaders of either country, but that's, we need to stay focused on that, on those end goals. Robin?
Yes.
Yeah,
Very loudly.
use my big boy voice. So earlier today, I posted on my personal Facebook page, that the policy of allowing white South African immigrants in, but revoking the refugee status of Afghan Christians and those who served with our military is inherently racist. Stephen Miller, on the lawn of the White House, said he wants to suspend writ of habeas corpus, which means you wouldn't even be able to bail me out. And so when I look at these bills that you're working on and your strongly worded letters, it feels a little insufficient.
Thanks. So with regards to the decision today to allow Afrikaners into the U.S. as refugees, it's ridiculous, it's dumb, it's misguided, it's not really based in history, it's not what our refugee system was set up to do, and then you couple it with the revocation of refugee status for Afghans who are in the United States. You know where this White House is headed when it comes to the treatment of refugees. And other refugee groups have already been targeted, whether Haitian, Venezuelan, Ukrainians as well. So you know where this administration is headed. And I appreciate the point about it being insufficient. I have the tools I have. I don't have more tools than that. I have the tools I have to provide oversight. I have the tools I have to work with other members of Congress to show the strength and the breadth of support or opposition to any number of things that the administration is doing. We also don't have, as an individual member of Congress, acting as a member of Congress, or as a body, we don't have standing in the courts, so we can't individually sue, or as Congress, as a body, can't sue the president. However, part of the litigation and response at House.gov website is to find those cases and support those cases through various means, whether that's helping to develop those cases, like Nick Brown's case and others on the birthright citizenship, the efforts to roll back the elimination of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, roll back other cases involving, like again, the Venezuelan deportations, and then the courts themselves have individual authority, legal authority to enforce their orders, civilly and criminally. And so you're seeing the judge that's in charge of the case on the deporting the Venezuelans, he is actually building the legal case to enforce his order. And it could be jail time, it could be fines of the people who are responsible for implementing that order. And other judges are in fact considering doing this as well. So I can appreciate how it's not enough for some, But I can also assure you that, and let me put it this way, the tools that Congress is using are the tools that Congress has always had since the beginning of the Republic for 238 years. And we're using them as actively as they've ever been used, and I know they're not enough. And they've never been enough. And they won't be enough for some of you. But there are the tools that we have to use in order to hold this administration accountable for any number of things. And there's more to do. And if you have a specific idea about what I should do, then you need to tell me that. You need to tell me if I'm missing something after 25 years in Congress about something that I'm not doing, then you need to let me know that. And I encourage you to do that. Absolutely. Please do that for me. Let's try this one more time, Sean, and or not.
Are we working? Not any squeals, we're good. Great. This is like the second lottery I've won in my entire life. The first one was the Vietnam draft. I appreciate you being here, Congressman. Sometimes we feel like we're out in the middle of nowhere. We have no scope for, basically in Congress. And quite frankly, I'm really tired of hearing about, Patty Murray and Jayapal. I'd like to hear from you because you represent us, here. Also, I'd like to say something about the VA. I'm a veteran, and I get services, in Mount Vernon. That's one of the best clinics I've ever been to, and not slow down. I've got to say, it actually improved during Trump's first term. It continued on right now. So what's happened with the VA, I'm not sure. I guess we'll see. I'm still getting appointments, and they're on time and it's sufficient. So the VA system here locally is doing well. My question is about Social Security. That's not your area. I had the same questions for Susan Delbeni when she had her area up here, and I never heard back from her. I would like to hear more specifically about, we've got a few Social Security people.
That's fine, just answer the question.
You're not quite ready, up there, but you're getting
I'm
close.
not going to characterize anyone.
You're getting close. So there's fear that we hear about Social Security being cut, that sort of thing. I want to hear more about that. I'm tired of hearing about a page with billionaires and stuff like that. What is being cut from Social Security? I'm still getting my check on Wednesday of every month.
Good, thanks. Thank you very much, appreciate it. I'm glad to hear you're using the CBOC in Mount Vernon. There's a new one that's opening in Everett as well to take some of the pressure off of the success of the Mount Vernon one. The CBOC community-based outpatient clinic was started because of veteran advocacy here in North Puget Sound. So just a lesson in advocacy, because the VA didn't think it would be very successful. And after its first 3 years, it already had they already hit the goal of the number of veterans they wanted to be serving out of that CBOC. First 3 years, and they had a 5-year plan. So obviously, there's a huge demand for that. I'm glad to hear that you're getting services, engaging appointments, and so on. We'll note that the Secretary of the VA has said he wants to cut 80,000 jobs out of the VA. So it has not hit yet, but it will hit if those folks aren't there. These are folks who are, when you look at 80,000 employees, you're going to be looking at people who do disability ratings. So you're going to be looking at people who coordinate appointments. You're going to be looking at some healthcare on the healthcare side. We don't know that yet. We don't know who it is, who's going to be. I will say the experience in the first 4 months of this administration is that federal employee job cuts have been pretty random. It's been about hitting a number, not about hitting the right number, not about hitting, that job is redundant, so we need to not have that person doing that job or that person at all. It's just been, we need to hit a number and we're going to fire the number of people underneath it. That hasn't hit the VA yet, but it's clearly the goal, stated goal of the Secretary of
I'll let you know if that changes in a few months.
So yeah, it'll be absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure you will. Tell Susan Delbeni too. I'm going to give you a second part. 8169, and I got and 8162, 8169, 8162. Okay. And then on Social Security, fortunately, we have 3 offices in the district. None of them have closed. Many offices around the country have closed. I heard from constituents about increased reported errors in payment amounts, notices their benefits were being decreased, difficulty in accessing the online portal, struggling to contact anyone in the Social Security office. This all hampers the ability of people to get benefits. When they do get them, they get the full benefit. But this is a different circumstance. If things got better under Trump 1.0 for Veterans Affairs, they are in fact getting worse for Social Security under Trump 2.0. And plenty of examples of that happened throughout the district. And so that's not good for the folks who are expecting these benefits. And so we're going to keep watching it. But again, you need to let me know if you have this experience so that we can follow up. Yeah, third guy in my you and me, sure. So, Ron.
As an ICU nurse here in Skagit County, I've seen firsthand how critical Medicaid coverages for patients who otherwise wouldn't get timely or adequate access to medical care. The recent CBO report projects millions to lose coverage under the Republicans' proposed Medicaid cuts in order to pay for trillions in tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy. What will you do to protect access to care for vulnerable communities in our state if these proposals move forward?
Thank you so much. First, I'm gonna do what I can. Anything else I can. The Republican proposal that came out today will result in, according to the Congressional Budget Office, I'm making the numbers up, these are numbers that we have to use in Congress, called the CBO, 13.7 million people will lose access to health care as they get it through Medicaid. And that, I think that one way to explain this so that you take this more personally is that no one really brags about their health care plan. I certainly don't. Certainly have a better one than some, but it's also not as good as others. But I don't talk about my health care plan. I don't know anyone who talks about their health care plan, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. But also, if you're on Medicaid, I can almost guarantee people don't. You're not telling your friends if you have a Medicaid health care plan. But 60% of the kids that were born in Skagit County in 2023, 60%, born in 2023 in Skagit County, were born into a family that uses Medicaid as a primary health care. 60. It's 50% in Whatcom County. It's about 40% statewide. So you don't have to play more than the game of 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon to know someone, or know someone who knows someone who's a friend, a neighbor, who is using Medicaid as a primary health care. And it's not just for a family, just to have health care. I met with ARC of Snohomish County, talking to parents and their kids who, a lot of them are on the spectrum, some of them extremely on the spectrum. And these families rely on home health care, home care providers to come in a couple hours a day to provide sometimes so mom and dad, brothers and sisters can have a break from providing direct care to that daughter, son, or brother and sister because they need it. That's paid for through Medicaid. That's paid for through Medicaid. So again, it's not just a health care plan to go to the doctor. It isn't just that. It goes deeper into our communities that you may not even be aware of right now. But when 13.7 million people end up losing health care because of this draconian budget, I assure you, you will find out from your neighbors, from your friends, from friend or friend. So I just wanted to underscore the question from the nurse because it really is, we need to think about this stuff personally. And not to mention the fact where they're going to go otherwise. They'll go to the ER. They'll go to Skagit. They'll go to Skagit Valley. They'll go to Island. They'll go to Peace Health. And you all pay for it because they'll be in the ER. They have to be accepted, and that money gets that difference in what they're getting paid will be paid for by you eventually. So that's where we're headed if this goes through. So what can we do? Right now we're fighting it. We're trying to emphasize in every district throughout the country what this will mean. So you do have a group of Republicans who are getting the message at home that this is a huge problem for them politically because they're going to be cutting health care for the people they represent. And they don't want to do that. So we'll see what happens, but we have to keep talking about it, keep coming with the facts, keep explaining what's going to happen. In rural areas, I have urban, I have suburban, I have rural, but they're really rural areas. I know a member who represents 69 counties in Kansas, right? That's a rural area, I assure you. Rural hospitals are going to close. Healthcare is going to disappear. People are going to travel hundreds of miles rather than tens of miles to get their healthcare if this happens. So it's a serious problem, and people at home need to be communicated to their members what the challenge is going to be. So watch this space this week. There'll be a debate on the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's called ENC, but Energy and Commerce Committee. That's where this debate is taking place on Medicaid. The Ways and Means Committee this week will be debating the tax cut package, a $4.5 trillion tax cut, when they're only envisioning about $1.5 trillion in spending reductions, which they're going to use to pay for the tax cut. And if history is a guide, as the 2017 tax cut is a guide, where 83% of the tax benefit went to 1% of the taxpayers in this country. So you might get a little bit, but they say about $2,200 for the average American. Well, if it's $3 for you and $1 gajillion for Elon Musk, that averages to $2,200. And so you're not getting a deal, and that's what the distribution of this thing is going to be if we don't fight it. So, in order, it was here in.
Hello. Currently in the United States, there are over 7 million people afflicted with Alzheimer's and many more with other related dementias. When my mother-in-law was diagnosed back in 1998, there was only about 3.5 million. Now it's up to 7 million. By 2050, there's going to be over 15 million. And currently, there's over 12 million unpaid caregivers in this country taking care of their loved ones with the disease, which is, they're being unpaid like $413 billion. This is costing us currently $384 billion for Medicare and Medicaid dollars, which could go up to about $1 trillion if we all solve it. How can we get the National Institute of Health budget to be increased to find a cure for it like we have for heart and AIDS and all the others?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you coming again. Always on the purple shirts or for the Alzheimer's Association. Appreciate it. Appreciate that being here again. So, the question's ultimately about, for those at home, the question's ultimately about Alzheimer's, funding for research, funding for care, and specifically what can we do to ensure that funding is at NIH or the National Institute of Health in order to continue this research. A great question, because NIH is one of those agencies that's on the target list, unfortunately, for this administration. National Institute of Health has different institutes. Everything from dental research to pediatric care research to brain research, other neurological diseases, including Alzheimer's. And I don't have the numbers. I'm going to find out, maybe you know them, but this NIH staff is being cut. The research is being cut. The administration is going after colleges and universities, including the University of Washington, to cut funding for healthcare research. And UW is the top recipient of NIH dollars in the country, I believe, if not like 1, 2, or 3, which they then turn into research that helps save lives later. Some of this research takes a while. It takes a while to get results. But that's what it takes to get results. We've been trying to find cures, treatments for Alzheimer's for a long time. Some advancements, never fast enough, but there will be no advancement with no dollars as well. And as you point out the numbers, more and more folks, as they get older, so that population gets older, it gets larger because of demographics. Just by definition, the number of folks who will have Alzheimer's at 65 and over is going to increase. And so it is in our best interest to find treatments and cures now and continue to invest in that, as opposed to later or doing nothing. Because nothing means higher Medicare costs, higher Medicaid costs, and we're, as I noted, they want to cut Medicaid in the future. So we've got a real challenge. So it's one of those issues, again, thanks for letting me know. I'm fully on board supporting NIH. But these are the kinds of things that we need to continually communicate about this administration. I will say the budget just came out. The president's budget just came out. And history shows the president proposes and Congress disposes. So we get our hands on the president's budget. Even Republican colleagues of mine are saying, yeah, some of the stuff is good. He may want to do some things, but we're not going to do those things. And I'm hopeful that NIH funding is one of those. I'm hopeful the Department of Education is one of those. I'm hopeful that USAID is one of those. I'm hopeful PBS, or Corporation for Public Broadcasting, is one of those. Because my sons grew up watching Arthur the Aardvark, and I watch him do Massachusetts Mystery. And a little itty-bitty percentage, a little itty-bitty, tiny itty-bitty percentage of public money goes to the PBS. Very little. But, you know, they want to get rid of that one also. Anyway, so just thanks for showing up and being vocal. A couple of numbers: 8182, 8182, 8154, 8154. Someone told me this is going to be bingo. Are you one of these numbers? Oh, no, we got these guys taken care of. Yeah, so you go ahead. Which one? Which number are you?
Oh, 54.
Okay, well, you can get mine. Sorry. I'm going to do it right. This is the first time I've done the lottery system, so. All right, we'll go over here and Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Rick. Got a question. Since the current administration is hell-bent on totally destroying our federal government, especially in the environmental protection part of the government, that we have pretty strong environmental protection. The problem comes when you're around a military installation and they use chemicals like PFOS, PFOA, or the Gen X chemicals, that those chemicals do not stay on the bases. And they, of course, the military has always said they have smart pollution. It doesn't go beyond their boundaries, which
that's not true, but go ahead.
Anybody who knows that there is kind of.
No, we don't have to.
So what are you going to be doing between the House and the Senate to strengthen the federal regulations and fight back against those disruptions?
Thanks. So the question from online, essentially the question is, what can we do to push back and fight against the administration of federal environmental regulations? Again, this is an area where the courts are our friend on this. My party, we are identifying those cases where we can support groups with standing in the courts to challenge the administration on cutting legally required environmental regulations, or those regs that have been affirmed by the Supreme Court in the past. Part of this is a matter of chasing down all the spaghetti that's being thrown on the wall the last 4 months. All right, so think of this: they bought all the spaghetti, they cooked it, and they threw it all up on the wall all at one time to see what would stick. And a lot of stuff stuck early on, including rolling back some environmental regs. They went back to the store, they found the price of pasta went up, so they bought something else. And they cooked that and threw it. Less of it is sticking. Less of it is actually sticking. In fact, when you look at now the courts, Trump is losing in the courts a lot more than he's winning in the courts. The numbers are really clear. So groups, people, unions, nonprofits need to continue to push on these, including in the environmental world. In my world, on transportation, we're fighting the department on environmental regs because they don't believe that, well, I would say, like I hate climate change and they love it. So the way I put it. They don't like carbon emission reduction. They don't like, and they don't like the rules that require higher standards for vehicles when it comes to emissions. And so we're pushing back on the administration. Where it's in the law, it helps. Where it was the previous administration, the Biden administration making a decision that they wanted to see something happen, but it wasn't in the law, it's really hard to win those. It's really hard to win those because those become a matter of administration preference as opposed to Congress has put a stamp on it. So that's some of the challenge that we face in Congress right now. I'm pushing back on some of these things. But when it comes to the EPA, there's a $20 billion fund that's used that the EPA doesn't want to utilize. They want to pull all that money back and use it to pay for part of the tax cuts. They don't want to cut the money. Do not let them tell you they want to cut the money. They do not want to cut the money. They want to put it in the budget on the spending side, spend it for tax cuts, including this $20 billion environmental fund. And they're having trouble. They did it initially, but they lost the first lawsuit. So the lawsuits are important. What we put in the law is important. And I'll be continuing to fight to put things into law as opposed to relying on the agencies or the next administration to do these, to increase environmental protection and decrease pollution. We need to actually do that in the law to make it harder for future administrations to pull it out. Here. Go ahead. You have to yell it.
I have to yell. Okay. My concern is a fairly recent one that's come up over the last weekend, and that is that Trump will be accepting gifts from foreign governments and states, $400 million, and it sounds like he's trying to use loopholes because they're going to donate it to the Pentagon, and then he's going to take it over for Air Force One, donate it to his library before he gets done, and then keep it for his personal use. How can we prevent this from happening?
Before I answer that question, I have an answer. 8176 and 8147. 8176 and 8147. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of issues that we need to be thinking about. Access to health care, access to nutritional assistance, ensuring Social Security offices stay open and the services that people rely on for Social Security so that their benefits stay open. Don't let the crony capitalism, corruption idea slip from your mind. The president's having a fundraiser in 2 weeks, week and a half at the White House for people who have bought his family's cryptocurrency. All right? Now, they won't raise the money at the White House because that's wrong. But they'll raise it otherwise, and then you come to dinner, and the buy-in, I think, is $2 million. Hopefully it's all in crypto because it'll be worth $1 by the time the dinner's over. And so that is just opening the White House for it's just opening it for corruption. I mean, it's expected, I think, from this particular president on this issue, and this is an example of what they're doing. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say Qatar is the best emirate ever. Qatar is a necessary country for the United States. They helped with the Qatari emir helped get Afghan refugees out of Afghanistan. There's a military Air Force base there that we use to be able to do that. They've helped with negotiations because we don't talk to the Taliban like the Qataris do. They help get hostages released. So that's good. That makes it necessary. But what they're trying to do is basically buy a friendship, and the president's letting them. The idea that we're going to accept a $400 million plane, a Boeing plane, but this is an Air Force problem, not a Boeing worker problem. The reason we don't have an Air Force One delivered already, even though it's been years trying to replace it, is one, Trump wanted to repaint it, and it costs a lot of money to repaint airplanes for those who are in airplane making. It costs a lot, and they're heavy, a lot of paint. But then the Air Force just messed up the procurement. So it's not a Boeing worker problem. They could build an Air Force One, outfit an Air Force One for the president. The Air Force had the problem in actually getting in this thing done. So he wants to go do this, get this luxury airliner, which is the Boeing. Yeah, but you just can't accept a $400 million airplane from a country or leader of another country for us to use. And nor will probably be outfitted by the time the current president is done being president. Because you have to take it. It's got to be ready for nuclear war. And you just don't do that. My 737 plane tomorrow is not ready for nuclear war. Right? That's not how it works. And then for him to say the Pentagon's going to operate it, absolutely going to operate it. No question. Pentagon should operate Air Force One, no matter what it is. But then they're going to donate it to his library afterwards so he can use it. Right? Now, Reagan got one, and if you've been to the Reagan Library, it's a great tour, and Air Force One is sitting there because it doesn't fly. It's a part of the museum. It's a great part of the museum. It's a great part of the Reagan Library. Trump won. Sorry, is he at a library? Second, he shouldn't be getting a working airplane from the federal government at all. And so something else is going on, and it's corruption. He's trying to appease, they're trying to appease, and it's not. And he's going to be in the Middle East this week doing business deals instead of working in diplomacy and peace. So we're tracking it. I'll talk to the Armed Services Committee members. I know I don't think I can think of one that's Democratic or Republican that's going to be very happy about this at all. Here.
Hi. I guess we all have in the last few months of doom scrolling, maybe kind of one story that really has stuck in our minds. And the one that's really stuck with me, there's some article in the New York Times a month or two ago, and it really was reflecting on kind of the permanent damage all of these job cuts are going to have, and how kind of the incoming Gen Zers are just not going to want to be in the civil service, and how that's going to cut across everything that's just so magical about our country. So I don't know if it's a question or just love to hear your comments or what. I mean, I know it's so harsh right now, but just thinking big, even 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, what are we going to be left with when we do have a president who can hopefully no longer serve in the Constitution? Can't, yes. What are we going to do to rebuild our civil service?
Great. I love that word, rebuild, because I'm already thinking about that. I'm not waiting for this administration to end. I'm not waiting for the election next year to end. I'm thinking we are going to have an agency that's in charge of international development on behalf of the U.S. in the future. It may be called the Agency for International Development on behalf of the U.S. But it is a necessary thing for the United States to be out in the world competing with China about who's going to be helping the world develop. We're going to understand that we need that, and so that's going to come back in some form. I would work with all my colleagues to make that happen. We're going to have to start rebuilding. We can't wait until next year. And as I said earlier, it's very difficult because we are Congress and the courts are moving as fast as Congress and the courts have ever moved, and it's not fast enough. for you all, for many of you all. It may be just fine for some of you, for all I know. And I know at least 35% of the people in my district think this. So, but we can't wait for that. We have to start rebuilding now. We have to do our own job at talking up the value of public service. I just met with managers of the AmeriCorps programs. The president eliminated funding for AmeriCorps. Big AmeriCorps, heaven. The president eliminated the funding. He didn't eliminate AmeriCorps. It's still on the books. It's still on the books. We're not going to eliminate AmeriCorps, but we're going to have to rebuild it. And I'm looking at a lot of agencies that way, but I should. Nothing about this is final where I come from, where I sit. Nothing about this is final. I just have a lot more things on my to-do list than I had on January 20th, or on November 7th, or whatever election day was. I said I was going to work on transportation, fighting fentanyl in our communities, and expanding Medicare, prescription drug coverage, and fight for the environment. Well, I got a lot of other things on the list now too, and I'm going to fight for all of them. Let's go here and then here. Okay, Sean, go. Speak loudly.
Hi. As you know, Skagit Valley is a big agricultural community, but it seems like there's a lot of people in ag that are missing from this room tonight. And I was wondering, what are you doing to defend and support the immigrants of our community being targeted and picked up by ICE? And what are you doing to help get these people back into their homes with their families and continue being contributing members of society?
Well, first off, I know a lot of these folks are contributing members to society, to their church, to their family, to local businesses, to the tax base, to the jobs they work in. And I welcome everybody who's doing that into my district, into our communities. And in the ag community, especially, in a district that has a lot of ag, I always call it dairies, berries, and potatoes. There's a lot of other things too, but those are the big ones in the district. And so, and the folks who work on these farms, I also know are an important part of our community, and they're being targeted. And there's folks who are working at Mount Baker Roofing who are targeted. And there are folks who are all over the country where ice raids are taking place. The president said he wanted to get rid of the worst of the worst. I'm in. I am for getting rid of deporting folks who are committing crimes other than being here illegally. We can handle. We have ways to handle the folks who are here illegally through pathways to help them stay. They've done something really, beyond that, horrible, a rape, a murder, and a few have. That's the worst of the worst. And that should be the target. But they're going after people who are trying to organize unions. That's not the worst of the worst. They're trying to go after people who are just helping people fix roofs in our neighborhoods. That's not the worst of the worst. It's clear that they really, and I'm not surprised, saying one thing and doing the other. And so I, for one, have been vocal on Leila's case. Again, we're in touch with his attorneys as recently as last week for an update. Senator Murray had a town hall or a round table. She's sort of taking a lead on this particular issue, a particular case. Working with Pramila Jayapal, who's on the ranking member, top Democrat on the immigration subcommittee. She's advising my office on how to deal, on how to work on the Mount Baker case as well. Meanwhile, I'm also in touch with some of the employers in the area, saying, you gotta let me know. If something's happening at your workplace, when it's happening, you have to let me know. You have to call me. I don't like to read about these things online. You have to let me know, so then we can do something about it. I don't know what it could be given the circumstance, whatever circumstance the next one might be, but you have to let me know. Because you're going to stand up for the people in this community who are working, who are paying taxes, who are, they're working their family, work with their families, they're going to church, they're contributing to our community, and even if they aren't, because they're at home with the kids, they need to be protected as well. Hearing too many stories about kids afraid to go to school because they're afraid that mom and dad might not be home when they go home from school. Too many kids, too many parents saying they won't send their kids to school because they're afraid their kids might be abducted when they're in school. And so I've been talking to school districts about what school districts can do. I know some people handed this out up front, but again, a reminder, we have the Know Your Rights cards that are out there too. Take a handful, share them. You can be part of this. People need to know what their rights are, because they do have rights, as I said. You don't have to be a citizen to have due process rights in the United States. For some people online, that's a highly controversial statement that I made. That I reiterate the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Highly controversial, but it's true. So you give me the list beyond what I just said of what I need to do. All right, and we'll see what we can do.
Go visit, lay low.
Go ahead.
Anyway, so back to Elmo and Elon started. So government's not spending much more money than taking in the tax receipts. The budget deficit is increasing. What oversight could you and your colleagues be doing to more in line with Dodge to control overspending and offer more oversight to take out waste in government?
Yeah, thanks. I'm kind of getting record as being against waste, fraud, and abuse of government. Is that right? And I'll accept that I'm against this. There's just not a line item that says waste, fraud, and abuse. And one of the problems with Doge, and there's several, one of the problems with Doge is that Elon Musk's idea is just to say, there's a line beyond which we shouldn't spend any money for something, and that's what the line is, and that means we have to cut X number of people. Maybe you can do that at Twitter and X. Maybe you can do that at Tesla. It doesn't work very well when you're in the actual service business, public service business of government. It just doesn't. So to the extent that this administration wants to change their prism a little bit and say, well, okay, we need to be more serious about how we go about cutting federal employees, the number of federal employees, which positions, because they're not necessary or they're redundant or so on. They can do that. In fact, last week, the federal judge said, I'm going to stop you from cutting more federal employees because in 2017, in Trump 1.0, you actually followed the law. And you just don't want to follow the law this time. So like we caught you. But there's a way to do this. It won't, again, on that theme, it won't be fast enough for some people. If you want smaller government, you want less people. But I will say this, the percentage of the federal workforce right now is about 2% of the total workforce. Percent of the federal workforce of the total workforce in the United States is about 2%. In 2001, when I came in, the percentage of the total federal workforce compared to the federal workforce was about 2%. So it hasn't grown relative to, although it has grown, it's a higher absolute number, but so is the GDP of this country, and so is the civilian non-federal workforce. It's also very large. And so it seems to me that there's a bit of a variance of false argument. They just want to cut government, just come out and say it like they did in Project 2025. Own the report that you love, and tell people, like, yeah, it's exactly what we're doing. We just want to cut numbers, regardless of the services. They don't want to take the credit for cutting the access to services. Right? They don't want to take the blame or the credit. So that's kind of quickly one thing I'd say. With regards to the budget itself and budget deficit, we're a long way from getting balanced. Breaking news. Everyone's sitting down here. I don't want to cause them to faint. But it doesn't help when you want to provide a $4.5 trillion tax cuts for people and only find $1.5 trillion in spending reductions. That's literally a definition of adding to the deficit. So the debt amount of choosing. I'm not going to stand up here and say Democrats are so much better. I'm not going to say that. Do not hear me saying that. But I am going to say that where we are right now, the problem I have in front of me isn't solving the problem you outlined. I got one last question. Burlington Edison High School, right here, one of them. You promised me. You promised. Go ahead and stand up. Burlington, what's your name? Representing the 18th. See, it's so easy. Isn't it well to stand up in front of people with a microphone?
Yeah, I was curious on how much of an effect words that we say in this room, how they affect your decisions that you make.
Great question. So as noted earlier, get a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, 2 times the number that we've had, 2.5 times the number we had last year. Trying to get those messages out as well, let people know what we're doing. We did telephone town halls, 29,000 people on 2 telephone town halls, one in January, one in February, one in March. So all those are important. They have 76 people, 76 different meetings, people coming in to DC, 106 meetings in the district since January 20th. Those are important too, and they're all part of the gumbo pot. They all go in the big pot of gumbo that gets mixed up, and then it eventually cooks and becomes a decision, it becomes a position. And a meeting like this is part of that input to me. Believe me, I have been fretting about this a lot longer than I've been fretting about the number of tours that we did in Washington, D.C. Go to how many people are going to show up. It's going to be a lot. I did a 2,800 person town hall in 2009, August 2009. 2,800 people at the baseball stadium in Everett. It was on healthcare, on the affordable care. So I've done big town halls. But right now, a lot of folks are doing town halls. There's a lot of energy out there. And I just wasn't sure how many folks are going to show up or not. But what I'm most impressed about tonight is largely the civility. Largely. And that gives me, that makes me feel good because it makes me think that the people I represent really do care. They might be afraid about what's going on. They might have a specific concern about what's going on, but their willingness to show up in a room and let me know puts a bigger stamp on it than just a letter or just an email. The other thing is the variety of questions. I usually pick people, but it's hard to do it in a room this size and say, you're next, you're next, you're next. So we did this thing. Worked out pretty well. It was pretty randomized. And it showed that the concerns that people have across the board about all these issues, to me, it does reflect a lot of what I'm hearing on the phone and emails. So it gives me confidence, it's really giving me confidence that I'm on the right track. And I also know that some people in this room, as well as 35% of the folks in the district, have a different view than I do of what the president's doing. Definitely. And I need to certainly continue to be respectful, but also be firm. I think what's going on in a lot of ways, I agree with the president on IVF treatment, by the way. Just figured the executive order on IVF, I was like, I'm all in. The Secretary of Transportation just proposed a major investment in the FAA to upgrade technology for the Federal Aviation Administration to make things safer. I'm all in. I'm going to support where I can, But like, dude, I'm not going to support 13.7 million people get kicked out of access to healthcare, or constitutional rights of people who should have them in the United States, having those violated. So, what this town hall is to me is one, a stamp that I'm mostly on the right track, representing the district. But second is, I hope for you all, it is an opportunity to look around and see your neighbors a little bit to see that you're not alone. You talk about doom scrolling. Stop doom scrolling. Lesson one. And it's okay if you do, but find something else. And that's what G. Smith's doing. As long as it's on the air. I'm finishing up X-Files. I mean, I have to step aside for you. It gives me confidence in generally on the right track. And I can feel comfortable going back to DC, fighting on your behalf. And seeing your faces, remembering your faces, putting faces to the questions. It's important for me. So, Will, thanks so much for the question. Thank you to BEHS, the Tigers. I was in Arlington Eagles, so it's a lot for me to be here right now. Thanks a lot.